Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. Yesterday I made a video in which I covered these mysterious jumps in the process of the counting of the votes in the early morning hours the day after the US presidential elections. And this happened, of course, in states that were first favoring Trump, but where the race was not yet decided. Now that is of course still an open question, and I hope that it will be investigated and that President Trump and his campaign will take legal action and launch an investigation into these shady affairs. Of course, we do not know why this was or what was really going on there, but it needs to be investigated. That's my point. But this is not the only irregular or at least very, very questionable observation that people made around the electoral process. There are so many stories coming up now, so many witness reports and testimonies of people who were observing the vote counting process and also voters themselves who claimed that their votes were invalidated. People were saying that they saw registration information of people who are already dead. Some people said that their ballots were stolen. There are reports about US Postal Service workers being instructed by their superiors to redate ballots. That means to give them the postmark of the 3rd when it's already the 4th of November. At the moment, these are only testimonies. These are only witness reports. But these allegations must be investigated. If this is true, and that is the hypothesis now, this is the question that needs to be answered. If this is true, then it was not only by one trick or by one technique that the Democrats here tried to steal the election, but by a whole plethora, a whole host of things. It's like they have a specialized toolkit with all sorts of different specialized tools that they could use or can use actually in order to swing the election, in order to steal the election. There were even reports about pens, so-called Sharpie pens, being handed out that wouldn't be read by the counting machines then or something like that. And that people were actively discouraged by staff to use ballpoint pens, which function very nicely, of course. The allegation would be that this was done in majority Republican areas in order to suppress their vote. Now, once again, I make it very clear that I don't know if these stories are true. I'm just saying these are the stories that we hear right now. These are the stories that are being reported, not by the mainstream media, not by the corporate media, but by eyewitnesses on social media, by the alternative media, by citizen journalists, by just normal average people, and by voters themselves. And I find it shocking, once again, not surprising, but shocking that the Associated Press, for example, and that all these pundits and all the mainstream, that they're standing there in front of the cameras saying that these are all just false reports and that there was no foul play and there is no evidence and everything is fair and transparent. How can they claim that? Did they investigate these allegations? I don't think so. So they can't possibly know if this is true or not. Now, full disclosure, I think, personally, my opinion, my gut feeling, let's say, that this was an orchestrated operation by a extremely diversified and extremely specialized nationwide operation, including government workers and a lot of powerful, well-connected people. A lot of NGOs and a lot of activists and the mainstream media, of course. But who is to say that it is not also an additional component that is at play here? And that is, for example, the way that most voter fraud happens in Germany. It is vote counting fraud, actually. The way it works in Germany is that in some villages or small towns, when all the people know each other, especially the votes of smaller parties can be suppressed quite easily by just declaring their votes or counting them falsely as invalid. Because if everybody in the room shares an understanding that this party is dangerous and they have the moral right to just suppress that vote, for the better good of course, then they just do it and there is no recounting. In the end, only the total sum of all the ballots will be accounted for, but not if they are correctly placed on the respective stacks. And that is the several parties and invalid, of course. So it can be shown scientifically with 100% accuracy that this is going on in Germany, but we don't know who did it and where it happened. We don't know these things. We just know that it definitely happens. But with this technique, you cannot steal 20%. You can suppress smaller parties. Why doesn't it work for bigger parties, like when there is a 50-50 split, like in the US approximately? Well, because these people will always have eyes in the most rooms. And then sooner or later you would be caught. And these witness reports, as we see them right now in the US, by the way, would surface. And by the way, that can be done by overzealous people on the ground. It doesn't have to be a top-down organization. It doesn't have to be orchestrated by a left-wing Marxist mastermind. It can be done by a handful of self-righteous, overzealous activists. And the higher-ups in the party and in these organizations, they would never know of that because they didn't give the order. So who's gonna say that this didn't happen here? So these people who are telling us now that all these stories are fake, they don't know that because they didn't investigate it. There is no way that they can possibly know if that is true or not, because they cannot exclude the possibility that self-righteous zealots were doing that completely on their own without instructions from above. And it is so crazy that they are just saying that these are only attacks on our democracy and they're just trying to undermine our democratic order and they don't want all the votes to be counted. No, demanding transparency and demanding investigations when serious allegations were being made is not an attack on democracy. It is actually an attempt to make sure that democratic rules and practices are respected and that the laws were not broken. Investigations are not an attack on democracy. So the list goes on and on and on. So many allegations, so many irregularities and strange observations by all sorts of people in all sorts of places. It is just not one state or one city only. Of course, I think Detroit is very bad, for example, but it is not limited to that. The impression that one gets when one reads all these stories is that it is happening everywhere. All sorts of different techniques are being used and it's happening on a massive scale. And it seems to have the backing of public sector workers and the media. And as I said, also NGOs, the notorious common suspects, are among them as well. So I think it is a good sign that Donald Trump has already announced that these things will be investigated and they will be challenged. They had 4 years to plan this massive operation, and I don't really believe that Donald Trump and his associates were idle during that time. They saw it coming, and I hope they had countermeasures prepared. And when things are very bad politically or economically, this is most often the time when in Western societies humor is used as a way to deal with this stuff. So this is a meme I liked really a lot. I could only find it in German. You see Aragorn from Lord of the Rings standing in front of the army of the dead that helped them to fight off the orcs at the siege of Minas Tirith. And the text says, "You helped Biden to victory. I hold your oath fulfilled." So I guess it all comes down to the question, what kind of banana republic America wants to be? Do you want to be a banana republic like Kyrgyzstan, where the people have to stand up and demand a re-election when there was clear rigging of the election, but the observers said that everything was transparent and fair, when in the end it came out that it was completely rigged? Or do you want to be a banana republic that is even worse than Kyrgyzstan, where the elites would actually succeed with their schemes? I guess we will see that in the upcoming weeks and months. So once again, I do not know if these things are true, but there are a lot of stories and that cannot be just coincidence. At least there should be investigations to make sure that everything was done regularly, which I highly doubt personally, of course. Take care, Servus, Kameraden.